Hello everybody, my name is Kat Bowser. I'm your resident fantasy therapist and welcome to my channel. Those of you who are here for the first time, welcome. Those of you who are returning, welcome back. Good to see you again. So for those of you who are new, my name is Kat Bowser. I am a licensed therapist, but I'm also an author working on my first novel. And on my channel, I like to dig into what I consider to be the heart of all writing, which are the characters. And the heart of the characters lie in their psychology. So on my channel, we will talk about multiple writing topics, tropes, characterizations, world building, all from a psychological point of view, because that's what's fun for me. That's how I think. So today, I thought it would be fun to dig into culture, specifically culture when you're creating a society for your novel. World building is a lot of fun. I really enjoy doing it. It can be easy to kind of fall into the black hole of world building, but I think if you attach it to your characters and what your characters are going to see, it's a lot easier to kind of keep yourself from running away with it. So today, I thought we would dig into just one element of culture because culture has multiple elements, and we'll dig into the others as we go. But for today, let's just talk strictly language. I'll be honest with you guys, one of the things that drives me completely nuts when I read a story is if everybody speaks the same language. Drives me crazy because it's not realistic. If you look at just our planet, Earth, we have, I think it's 7.7 billion people now or something like that. It, at least as of last year, I believe. There's almost 7,000 different languages on this planet. That is a lot of different languages. And a lot of times, especially in sci-fi, you're talking about these people that go to all these different planets and all these different locations, usually like galaxies away. And yet everybody speaks English or whatever the common language is. I'm not buying it. I'm not. And I think it really limits your world when you don't introduce the idea that there are more than one language, because cultures develop and they interact with each other and they change and they alter. So multiple languages is kind of a given. In my story I'm working on right now, I think in total there's there's 7 that I mentioned. Doesn't mean I go in depth on each of them, but there is a language barrier when these people meet because they have to figure out how to communicate with each other. And then there's this aspect. I can guarantee you, if you go down to the American South, like deep South, they're going to speak English, but you're not necessarily going to understand it because each region has its own little phrases, their own little tidbits, their own little. Each region has their own dialect, and it's not just how words are spoken, but how they're used. For example, my husband is an Arizona native. I'm originally from North Carolina. The other day, I referred to money as bucks. And he just kind of looked at me like, what? What? And I had to explain to him that was a term for money. He had never heard of it. Also in the South, you have little phrases that unless you grew up there, you're not really going to always get them. Fit to be tied is one, which is basically means someone's going to be really angry. And fit to be tied is a reference to tying a pig. That's where it comes from, as far as I'm aware. And then you have little things like, bless your heart. This phrase means so many different things depending on how you say it. It can either be genuine, although this is pretty rare, but it can be genuine. Most of the time, this is a very sarcastic way of telling someone they're an idiot. Politely. But you kind of see what I'm saying. That's an aspect of language that varies just in one language, American English. I am sure there are so many different phrases in like British English, um, in probably Canadian versus France French. Each language develops its own little phrases that you don't really pick up on unless you live there, unless you grew up with that. Um, in my world that I'm working on, there is a language called Balana, and a phrase in that language is "Your roots grow in fire." It does not mean physically roots are growing in fire. It's a phrase essentially that means you've got big balls. Essentially, you have guts, you have bravery, but it's a very crude way of saying it. So it's something that you wouldn't necessarily say in front of your mother. But little things like that are important in language. And then there's the aspect of, you know how many words we borrow from other languages? I don't. I know it's a lot, but I'm not going to tell you how many because I know it's a lot. When I was in high school, we said sayonara all the time. I maybe speak 15, 25 words of Japanese. That's one of them. It's one of them that I know. Um, there's faux pas, which I'm probably saying that wrong. I took 3 years of French. I'm still pretty sure I said that wrong. That's made its way into our language. A lot of the terms that we use, like paternity, sorority, um, maternal, those all come from Latin. When cultures interact with each other in history, it's usually like through trade and things like that, and people immigrating and things like that. And they bring their culture with them. And so it literally becomes a melting pot. So you have a whole bunch of different influences that act off one another. Another thing, let's talk about nonverbal language. Because honestly, guys, about 90 to 95% of communication is nonverbal. What you say really doesn't mean as much as how you say it and what you do when you say it. I mean, think about all the gestures that you know of. Like in America, I know we have this, which is kind of self explanatory. We have this, we have this, we have this. And those are just the ones I can think of right now. And I'm sure in other countries there's a whole bunch of other ones. Um, in in my in my novel right now, one of them is this. Put your left hand over your heart, you extend your hand. And that is an offering of peace. That is, I accept that you come in peace. I'm not going to try and hurt you. The reason it's the left hand is because in this group of people, most people are left-handed. And the left hand, the dominant hand, would go for your weapon. So if you're welcoming someone with your left hand, you are saying there's no need for me to draw a weapon. If you do the opposite, if you use your right hand, it is more of a neutral. I am allowing you to come in, but I'm not necessarily welcoming you. And if they don't extend their hand at all, it's kind of a threat. So little things like that. I mean, I know that in some Asian cultures, you wouldn't call someone like this because it would be insulting. Again, I'm not an expert on this. This is just information I've gotten over the years studying different cultures. So you would call them like this, as far as I'm aware. Anyone who's from those cultures, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. But these are things that you can talk about when you have different cultures interact with one another. And I think a lot of times they are unfortunately skipped over when people do culture. A lot of times I'll see like the same gestures and things that we have in other cultures. And while I'm not against that, I would very much like to see more unique gestures, things that are unique to this culture. Because, like I said, we have such a variety of cultures. We have so many different countries. We have so many different people with different beliefs and all those kinds of things. And all those factor in to the gestures that we use. I believe flipping the bird was originally first used like way back, I think it was in Greece. as far as I'm aware, and it was to taunt an enemy, to the best of my knowledge. And then over the years, it has evolved and changed and things like that. So that's something else to keep in mind, is that language doesn't stay the same. It changes. It changes over history by introduction to other people, and it just changes in general with history. If you went back to the 1800s, for example, in either America or Britain, you would have a very hard time understanding people, even though they're still speaking English, just because the language has evolved so much since that time. If you really want a challenge, go and look up some poems or some writing that was done in like the Middle Ages, for instance, and read it like as it was written. You might be able to do it, but you're gonna struggle, because again, language evolves over time. And I think that's something that people need to keep in mind when they write stories, is a lot of times we do bring up the past, we do bring up history, and you're not really gonna have an easy time with something from history unless you're trained in it. Because, like I said, go back 200 years, you're gonna have a hard time understanding your own language. And that's something that we need to keep in mind when we do all these stories. Now, obviously, guys, this is just a very brief overview of one aspect of culture, but I think it's an interesting one and one to keep in mind. Another thing is how we pronounce things. When we're very little, like under 5, and we're first learning language, our ears and our brains can pick up almost every single tone that is spoken in any language. But by the time we're 2 or 3, if we're not hearing a specific one, our brain filters it out, like, okay, that one's not important. And when it comes to learning multiple languages, if you are to teach a child how to speak more than one language before they're 10, they will speak it without their natural accent. So if you were to teach a child that was, like, say, for example, 7 years old, let's say we're going to teach them how to speak, let's say, German. They will speak it without an American accent, because they can pick up on those little tiny vocal changes, and they can speak it as if they were naturally born there, naturally know how to speak it. If you try to teach a child how to speak a language after they turn 10, they will have an accent, because those sounds are now essentially locked in. And another thing that happens is, if you learn a new language before you're 10, it's stored kind of in the same area in your brain as English. So if the word for red in another language is rojo, I'm not even going to pretend I'm saying that right, but as close as I can get, then both those words are like synonyms to the child. So I can either use red or I can use rojo. But if you do that after they turn 10, they have to translate it into their native tongue first. Then they can speak it. So these are all interesting ways that language develops and people learn it. So just something to keep in mind when you're going through your world building process. All right, guys, so that was just a little intro, I guess, to a series I want to do on culture. And so this was our first dig into language. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, please feel free to leave comments or suggestions below. I always love responding to you guys, or you can always follow me on social media. If you like this kind of content, please make sure that you subscribe and ring the bell so you know whenever I put up new videos. I upload every Thursday and every Sunday, and I will occasionally throw some extra videos in there for you guys. So until next time, I hope you guys have a good one.